In today's video, we're doing some flower photography. I've got some lovely pink and purple orchids here to take some photographs of, some very intricate flowers with lots of detail, but I want to focus on getting some dramatic photos. I want to enhance the lighting and really get to grips with making these orchids stand out. I'm going to go and get started, so I'll see you in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another flower photography video. Today we're taking a look at how to get dramatic shots of these orchids. As I mentioned, they're very beautiful, intricate and detailed flowers. Their layout of their petals is quite unique, and I think that is going to lend itself to a little bit of experimentation with how we approach our lighting. I'm going to go and get some lighting out, set up the rest of my equipment, and then we can take a look through the lens. My photography setup for today is pretty straightforward, and a lot of you will have seen me use this very versatile setup for all sorts of different subjects, not only flowers. So first off, I've got my Sony a7 III, and attached to the front of that I've got my f2.8 100mm Tachyna lens. This is a macro lens, so it's going to get nice and close to the front of these relatively small flowers and hopefully capture a lot of nice detail. My camera is attached to a sliding focus stacking rail, which is going to allow me to focus on the entire flower and all of those petals. And then of course I've got all of that sat on a tripod. I've also got a shutter release cable attached to my camera so that when I'm focus stacking, I'm not wobbling the camera too much. All of that is going to suit these flowers really nicely. As I mentioned, the petals of these flowers are relatively small as flowers go, but they're packed with detail. So the macro lens is going to allow us to get nice and close. I found a nice flower that I like, and I've found an angle that I like. So the very next thing that we need to think about is our lighting and how we're going to start to make it look dramatic. So you can see on the back of the camera, I've got this nicely composed shot of my orchid. It's just sat over here, and you can see that there is a lot of ambient light both in the room and on the orchid itself. What I want to do is try and introduce a little bit of darkness. Now to do that, I'm going to have to change my camera settings. They're currently sat at 1/160th, ISO 4000 and f5.6. So there's a few ways that I can change my settings here, but the most obvious one is to lower my ISO so we get a little bit less grain. I'm going to drop my ISO all the way down to maybe 200, maybe even a little bit lower, so that the entire background of my shot is dark. Now obviously this is going to make my orchid dark as well, but we're going to compensate for that using some lighting. I'm going to introduce some light back into this shot to light up the face of my orchid. When it comes to dark background, dramatic lighting, it's really important to get into the habit of thinking about the different parts of your image separately from one another. We've just darkened our entire image to make our background dark, but of course that has also darkened our subject. But what we can do here is light our subject separately from that background, bringing our subject back to be nicely exposed, but leaving our background really dark and moody. What we need for that is some highly controllable lighting. We need to introduce a little bit of artificial light in the form of the Adaptalux Studio. So this is a miniature lighting studio with flexible light sources, lighting arms. You can plug lighting arms in and then have this small flexible light source that is easily controllable and diffusible using attachable filters. This small light source is going to be perfect for lighting the front of our flowers without spilling any light onto that background and illuminating some of the objects behind our flowers. I'm going to set up one lighting arm onto the front of my orchid and see what it looks like just with a single diffused light source. So as you can see there, I've lit and focus stacked one shot of my orchid. Bringing in the light from a single direction really adds a lot of contrast and a lot of shadows into the petals of my orchid. Most notably though, we're bringing back all of that color and exposing our orchid separately from our background, leaving that completely dark. This really makes our flower stand out from the background. It's not busy, and we've got a lot of dramatic contrasty lighting just on the face of our orchid, despite it being really bright in this room. Using your settings in combination with some artificial lights, you could easily achieve this outdoors or in a studio as well, provided your lighting is controllable and powerful enough to be able to overpower the ambient light. If you'd like to know a little bit more about achieving dark backgrounds without the use of a black backdrop, I'll link to a video up here dedicated to that technique of changing your settings and adding some additional light. Now, when you're going for contrasty, dramatic lighting like this, it's very tempting to not diffuse your light source. You can see here that we've got some very harsh shadows across the petal here, where the light source is casting a shadow across this inner petal and onto the outer one. To be able to change that, we need to be able to change our light source. I'm going to snap a diffuser onto the front of my lighting arm, and you can see that it's taken away a little bit of our light, but it's also softened that shadow there. That makes a huge difference. We're not taking away the shadow, we're just softening the edges of it a little bit and making the light look a little bit more pleasing. Now, we've got different levels of diffusers. This is a level 2 diffuser, so a medium amount of diffusion, but you can experiment with more or less diffusion as you wish. Another big factor is the direction that your light is coming from. So you can move the flexible lighting arms into different positions to change the position of those shadows. Now, obviously, you're also going to try and keep the light source from entering your photograph. Like if I were to leave it there, it's obviously not going to be very good with that big diffuser sticking out of the corner of our photograph. But we can experiment with a few different positions, and with a flexible light source like this, there's a lot of different options of where to place your light, including behind the petals themselves. Lighting flowers from behind is a technique that I absolutely love. I've tried it a few times before with great success. Putting your light source behind the flower can bring a lot of the color of the petals through and highlight some of the internal structure of the flower too. However, it's pushing the dynamic range of my camera to its absolute limit with these orchids. We've got some really dark areas of the petals with those deep purples in the center, and then towards the edges of the petal we've got thin white bits which are allowing a lot more light through. To get a proper exposure, I'm having to expose the white areas a lot more than I'd like, and then it's leaving the darker purple areas a little bit underexposed. For that reason, I'm going to stick to lighting from the front. I'm going to keep my nice single diffused white light source pointed at the front of my flowers, which I think is giving me a really nice amount of contrast between the light and the dark areas, and bringing through a little bit of the color at the same time. Flower photography is obviously a very popular subject, especially amongst macro photographers who are always trying to get as close as possible and extract as much detail from their subjects as they can. However, as popular as it is, it's not known for being dramatic. It's not the most visually entertaining or evocative subject to shoot. However, with the addition of some extra lighting and some carefully placed shadows, you can really take your flower photography to the next level and introduce a little bit of extra intrigue and drama to your images. I've really enjoyed shooting my orchids today. The colors and the detail are fantastic, especially with that lighting and of course focus stacking to get all of the flower in focus. But I'd like to know from you guys what you thought of my images and my techniques today. Let me know down in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like. While you're down in the comment section leaving your thoughts, make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you're here for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration in the future. For now, that is all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.